America is home to 33 million small businesses, the beating heart of communities across the country.
And proof that the American dream is still alive.
This is a show about those dreamers and doers and the communities they serve.
Their real life stories.
Their struggles and successes.
Their grit, determination, and passion.
And the people who fight
to keep their American dream alive.
I'm Alfredo Ortiz.
I'm Elaine Parker.
And it's time for another episode of Main Street Matters,
America's small business megaphone.
Hi, and welcome to another episode of Main Street Matters, America's small business megaphone. I'm Elaine Parker, the president of the Job Creators Network Foundation.
And I'm Alfredo Ortiz, CEO of Job Creators Network.
And you can subscribe to our podcast at Salem Podcast Network or wherever you get your podcast from. Today, we are actually joined again by Chip Rogers. Chip, after a successful 5-year run as president and CEO of the American Hotel and Lodging Association, joined Ervin Graves as a senior advisor in March, and also joined the Job Creators Network Foundation Board of Directors. Chip, welcome back to Main Street Matters.
Well, it is so good to see both of you, and thanks so much for having me.
Well, you have definitely been busy since the last time you were on the show. Not only did you join our board recently, of our foundation board, but tell us about your new role with Ervin Graves and what you're doing.
Well, I got the opportunity to join a dear friend of mine, former Congressman Tom Graves. Tom and I have been friends for, over 20 years now. We had both served in the legislature in Georgia, spent time vacationing, our families together. Just a really good guy, really good friend. And it also gave me an opportunity to slow down. So Tom took over this firm, Ervin Graves, just a few years ago, about 3 years ago, and is doing some really good work advocating on behalf of business interests here in the nation's capital. As both of you know, because I know you travel a lot, and Alfredo, I see you on the road all the time. It can become a long, tough slog. And last year I spent 240 days on the road. The year before that, about 220 days on the road. And so it was time for me to spend a little bit more time here at home in the nation's capital, which I enjoy. And so the opportunity to work alongside of a dear friend, Tom Graves, to do really good work on behalf of some great clients and spend a little bit more time in one place, that was quite appealing to me. And so I've enjoyed it the first couple of months. Much slower pace than I had been going at over the last 10 to 12 years, but very enjoyable.
Do you have an industry or a focus area that you're working in?
We help anybody and everybody. And so I wouldn't say it's a specific industry, but my history over the last more than a decade has been working very closely with membership associations who represent private sector industry. And so, I will be able to call on some friends there and see how we might be able to help them. But we're full service, and we'll help anybody who needs help navigating what can be the arcane world of government bureaucracy.
And there's plenty of it out there, right?
Yes, there is. No short supply.
It's absolutely crazy. Just kind of saying a little bit on the politics side, there's some craziness going on, obviously, that we've seen over the past couple of weeks, especially on the House side. You have your ear tight to what's going on there. Can you give us kind of an overview or your perspective, at least, as to what is going on in the House and the current speaker and kind of the state of affairs, since you do have your pulse on what's going on there?
Yeah. I learned a long time ago that one of the great truths in life, and I can't remember who said it, but the statement is politics is the art of the possible. Is so incredibly important. And I know during my career in elected office, you learn that quickly. You can either make a lot of noise, grab a lot of attention, and accomplish very little, or you can get to work trying to accomplish a lot. I mean, President Reagan talked a lot about this, about moving the ball slowly down the field and getting what you can get. And unfortunately, there are folks who have realized that the way that we digest media today or digest information today allows them to generate quite a bit of notoriety, revenue in the form of campaign contributions by being on the extreme side of any issue, or in this case, the extreme side of how the House is governed. I mean, if you ask people today who are in the know, what's the worst job in America, it's probably the Speaker of the House, because on one hand, you are the Speaker of the entire House, not just one party. And while Speaker Johnson, obviously a conservative Republican, he does have to govern the entire House of Representatives, which is the most closely divided House of Representatives, I think, in the nation's history. So you have that. And at the same time, every single time he takes a vote or puts a vote on the floor, he has to worry about someone who doesn't agree with that calling to vacate the chair and him losing his job. So you got to do what's right. But when you do what's right, you might be costing your job. That is the worst possible place to be in. I just think we got to have a reset, and people have to understand, people at home have to understand that just because your representative doesn't vote exactly the way you want them to doesn't mean they're not doing a good job. And let them govern. If you're a Republican and you want them to move the ball towards the right, let them govern in a way that slowly but surely moves the ball to the right. If you're a Democrat and you want them to move the ball to the left, same thing applies. But don't throw them out because they're not 100% pure, because even the greatest leaders in our nation's history have never been pure. Think of George Washington, Abraham Lincoln, Ronald Reagan. They were all amazing presidents. They didn't get everything right. And if we held them accountable that any single decision they made would have cost them their job, just think about the leaders who wouldn't have.
Yeah, to me, it just doesn't really make much sense. And this rule is relatively recent, I believe, right? This motion to vacate, where only one person in Congress can actually put that motion forward and basically activate it, so to speak. It is a relatively recent rule, right?
Yeah, I think it is. It came up when Speaker McCarthy became the speaker, and I think he felt, and I certainly can't put words in his mouth, and I wasn't there, but he probably felt this was the only way he could end that marathon, which I think was like 17 or 18 rounds of voting. I think in retrospect, he probably would have held on for a few more rounds of voting and until they got this right. I don't think he ever contemplated someone using this over a single vote. And what's being thought of today, some of the reasons that are being suggested on why people might kick out Speaker Johnson are highly divisive issues. Things like Ukraine funding, whether you think it's right or wrong to fund Ukraine, you also have to recognize that the American people are pretty much split on this. And if you're in a representative body, you got to figure they're going to be split on it as well. So you can't just be so pure that you bog down the way that government works. You have to be principled, but you also have to get things done.
Yeah, it just seems like, again, an arcane or ridiculous rule that I think it needs to be revisited. It's basically like if you're in the middle of a marriage and you basically say, hey, I think this wall should be painted blue, and you go, I don't, so I'm going to get a divorce from you. It's just like, it's just every single thing coming out of your mouth. You have got the specter of this issue. I just don't understand how we can have a working Congress and a working House with this rule in place.
No doubt.
So, small business. You actually obviously have been around small business since your time in the legislature with Georgia, and you were also president of AHOA, the Asian American Hotel Owners Association, and then the AHLA. So small business has been in your blood for quite a while. There was a recent report that talked about how this is like we're having a generational boom of small businesses, and it's been highlighted and celebrated. I kind of have a different take as to what's going on. I personally think it may be because people can't make ends meet, so they're doing their full-time job, and then they're opening up a small business to try to augment their income. But that's just my kind of anecdotal personal opinion. What do you think, Chip? And have you seen that report by chance?
Yeah, look, a lot of things have changed. Think about how you would have had to operate the small business 30 years ago and the institutional hurdles that might have been placed in your way. Just simple things like opening up a bank account, putting an ad in the newspaper, renting an office space. These are things that are no longer necessary with respect to getting in your car and going somewhere and taking all that time and effort. You can do all of it almost instantly online. So I think technology has played a huge role. I think the second part of that, and you alluded to it, is the gig economy is real. It is a good thing. It allows people to work and start small businesses in addition to their regular work and work from home or work in a way that they get to design their own work schedule. So the gig economy has been fully embraced by both those providing the services and the goods and those purchasing the services and the goods. And so that clearly helps. And then I think that policymakers are certainly understanding this as well. And if you look at some of the things that states are doing to encourage the creation of small businesses, you can see why people are now saying, hey, this is easier than ever to start that small business. A perfect example, Utah, just in the last couple of days, came out with a new plan. And the Governor Cox there said he wanted to make Utah the startup capital of the world. And frankly, they probably almost already are in many ways. I was just looking at the numbers recently. Almost half of all people employed in the state of Utah work for a small business, many of them which, of course, are startups. And so, yeah, the U.S. Census Bureau came out and said last year was a record, 5.5 million. But that, I think, to your point, is because it's easier. People have embraced the gig economy. Many states are creating policies to make it super simple and profitable to start that small business. And because of inflation and some other struggles that people are having to go through, it makes economic sense to try to get that secondary income.
Yeah. Well, I mean, under this administration, it seems as though it has been harder for small businesses to survive. So, I think we can all agree that we've probably never met a small business person that says, give me more regulations and higher taxes. So hopefully this environment will change for our small businesses in the next administration.
Well, the way that it would change, it's something, we have these fights all the time. And I'm here in the nation's capital. And so I understand the importance of the federal government. But when our founders created this model, they were extremely clear about what they thought the role of the federal government was, and it's contained in the 10th Amendment. And so if you want to solve these problems, what you do is you have Washington, D.C. and federal law involved in almost nothing that a small business would do. And you allow the states to govern that. And that would allow people to make a decision. Do I live in Utah, which according to a recent survey was the number one place to do business, or do I go to New York, which that same survey, and I always like to cite my good friend Jonathan Williams over at ALEC, who created this report called Rich States, Poor States, and New York is the 50th. Now, it's important too, I was looking at some numbers to that effect, Alfredo, that since 2020, the last 3 years of census numbers, the top states where people are moving to, the population increases, are almost all contained in the top states to do business. The bottom states for where people are losing population are almost all contained in the bottom states, the worst places to do business. And the most amazing thing is that the one state that lost the most population last year, or since 2020, is the state of New York. They also happen to be number 50 on the Rich States, Poor States ranking. So it's no surprise that terrible policy will send people out of your state. But the good news is, when you don't have an overburdensome federal government, is that you can move to a state like a Utah, an Idaho, a Florida, where it's easy to do business. And that was kind of the genius of what our founders created from the beginning.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, thank you for that, Chip. I think it's an excellent point and one to definitely chew on, because these states that are losing these populations the way they are, I mean, at one point, they just can't keep taxing people to make up for those budget deficits before it just breaks, the entire system in their state.
Well, it's a death spiral, because it's the young people that have the opportunity before they get rooted with a family or too far along in their career who can get up and move. And if the young people move out of your state, who are you left with? You're left with an aging population, which at some point doesn't have the income for you to tax. And if you can't tax, then you can't provide the services. If you can't provide the services, essentially cost of or the standard of living begins to fall rapidly. And you're seeing that happen in places like New York, where there are many other factors taking place, including the migrant population problem. But I mean, just basic fire and safety and law enforcement are falling by the wayside because you're losing your tax base.
Well, as they say, capital goes where it's welcome, right? That's why they're leaving states that are high tax and going to states that have either no state income tax or low state income taxes, or low taxes in general. And we're seeing more states move towards getting rid of their state income tax. I know Georgia's working in that direction. Iowa's working in that direction. Arizona has cut their taxes under Governor Ducey. We'll see what happens under the new governor. But yeah, I mean, it goes where it's welcome, for sure.
Well, my good friend, Dr. Art Laffer, used to cite an example. Now, this is going back 20 years. I'm not sure if it holds true, but it probably does. He said, look at the one-way cost to rent a U-Haul truck in Los Angeles and drop it off in Nashville, Tennessee, and then look at the one-way cost of renting that U-Haul in Nashville, Tennessee, and dropping it off in Los Angeles. You'll see an incredible different price because of the demand is all leaving California to go to Tennessee, not the other way around.
There are a lot of transplants from California to Tennessee. Hopefully they keep Tennessee the way it is instead of changing it. They don't bring their politics with them.
Yeah, bad policy can become a cancer quickly.
Yeah, sometimes I think that there's a little bit of strategy there with some of these blue states that don't seem to make the connection between these high tax and high regulation policies and the people leaving, and that sort of the powers that be, if you will, see it as it's fine. We'll just spread the cancer. It's fine if we take everybody from New York and they move to Florida, because then we'll make Florida like New York, and we'll see those types of policies.
Yeah, I hear that a lot. I think in some cases, particularly in the western U.S., where people have flooded out of California into neighboring states, that may be true. But in the case of New York to Florida, I think probably more likely what's happening is the people in New York who are business people who want to create opportunities for others are seeing that they can't do so in New York, and they move to Florida, and they don't necessarily export the bad policies with them. So I think it might be a regional phenomena, but it certainly happens. I'll give you a story that I think is so interesting. I'm going to take you back to when I was in elected office, and I served under a couple of wonderful governors, but one of those two gentlemen was Governor Nathan Deal, who, Alfredo, I know you know well. I'll never forget when he got elected governor. He had a long, storied career in the House of Representatives in Washington, D.C., but the State House, the State Senate, he'd been a judge. This guy had done and seen it all. And when he got elected governor, he was up there in years, and so he had a ton of experience. And he sat us all down, and the entire legislature, and he said, look, all of you probably have priorities that you think are important. And those priorities could run from, the most bizarre social issue you might think to, bicycle paths on the road and anything in between. But what Governor Deal said was, look, I am going to focus while I'm governor on one thing and one thing alone. And that is to make Georgia the most business-friendly state in America. Because if we can do that, all the things that you care about are much more easily attained. And he did that. He was solely focused on that. And during his entire time, and even since he's left office, Georgia has routinely been ranked as one of the top, if not the top, places in America to do business. And because the economy grew, because there was the opportunity to create those small businesses, people were better off. And Governor Deal saw that as a singular focus of let's do good and provide opportunity for everybody. And then you can take your pet cause or whatever it is you want, and you can build off.
And what's interesting is Georgia has even created, what do they call it, another Hollywood, where there are a lot of tax incentives to come and shoot films there and movies. And I can't tell you how many times I've landed and had an Uber driver pick me up, and it's somebody who's, driving an Uber, but they're really a part of a movie set, and this is just their in between. So it happens all the time when I'm up there, but same thing. It's like they don't seem to connect the policies of why are we filming in Georgia versus California, where we've always filmed. Well, because it's a more tax-friendly state. We have incentives to be here because we're bringing jobs and we're bringing revenue, and California doesn't seem to want it.
It is. It's so simple. Yeah. I'll read you again. Here are the 8 states that had the biggest population loss between 2020 and 2023. You tell me, are these states known for their positive economic policies? Number 1 is New York. Number 2, Illinois. 3, not a state, but it's here, the nation's capital, Washington, D.C. Then Louisiana, California, Hawaii, Mississippi, and West Virginia. And so I know there are other factors on why people might leave a state. But the flip side, what are the states that had the biggest population growth over the last 3 years, where people are flooding into these states? It's Idaho, Florida, South Carolina, Texas, Utah, South Dakota, Montana, North Carolina, Delaware, and Arizona. Policy absolutely matters. And Elaine, what you referenced just a moment ago, Georgia never had movies filmed there, never had television shows filmed there. Why did the movie industry just randomly pick Georgia? Well, they didn't. They looked at the taxing environment. When the law was passed, I was in the legislature when we passed that law, and it made it financially viable to create this industry in Georgia that had never been there before. And the hundreds of thousands of jobs that have been created from that are lifting all boats. It's absolutely working. And I love your fact about the Uber driver, because now the Uber driver who's working on the movie set in Georgia that he couldn't have done 20 years ago because there were no movies there, also gets to drive people from point A to point B in a gig economy where he sets his own hours, because technology in an unregulated industry and moving people back and forth through Uber and Lyft and everything else allows him to do so. Had he wanted to do that as a cab driver, he or she probably would have never had the opportunity. And so all of this stuff is policy that matters, and it drives economies either forward or backward.
It's just like we talk different languages, though. I mean, when I hear you speaking my language. And if you were speaking to somebody out in California or Governor Newsom himself, you might as well be speaking, in hieroglyphics, because he wouldn't understand it.
Well, or in Chinese, because he would understand Chinese since he loves them so much.
Look, I think there's two things at play here. One, yes, there's a lack of knowledge at some level. Two, they don't want to either understand it or to ignore it. I mean, it is human nature. You used to tell the story all the time of if you took two of your kids out in your backyard and said, hey, I want you to go out and pick up every pine cone and every stick in the backyard. And no matter if you pick up 1 or 100, I'm going to give each of you $10 at the end of the hour. What do you think they're going to do? They're not going to pick up anything, right? And so we all know as children that there's human nature involved here. As we get older as adults, we realize that if we want to agitate or enrage or encourage a certain constituency, we have to play to whatever their cause is, whatever they're upset about. And 9 times out of 10, that's not economics. So, going back to the policies I mentioned of Governor Deal, making Georgia the most business-friendly state in America wasn't that's not headline news. That was just solid. That's the way government should be run. Right. That's solid policy making. And folks don't play that game anymore. They want to throw the bomb, get on the news, say the crazy stuff. I mean, Alfreda, you've done quite well in letting everyone know some of the policies and suggestions by AOC, but she's kind of mastered that on one side, and there are folks even out of the state of Georgia that have mastered that on the other side of just saying the most crazy things to get attention drawn to them. That's not how legislation should be made.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and the unfortunate part, though, is that seems to be more the norm now than the exception. And I don't know, I mean, as over the 11 years that I've been doing this, Chip, I just see more and more concern about how we as a country lead, right? I mean, from both sides, honestly. I do kind of scratch my head when I hear AOC talking as much as when I hear Marjorie Taylor Greene talking. And they're both bombastic, and I don't know. I'm from the old school where you sit down, you air your differences, you come with compromise. I think as you can appreciate this as a legislator in Georgia, you were voted in to lead, right? To lead a people, to lead your district, to lead a state house, whatever. It's like we're forgetting that that's actually what it takes to move a country forward.
Well, and not only that, no one's ever, unless you're running unopposed, gotten 100% of the vote. So if you were to take the district that I represented years ago, it was a significant majority one party, but that doesn't mean that I represent only the people in that party. You represent all the people in your district. You have to take all of their thoughts and ideas into consideration, no matter which side of the aisle you're on. And yeah, you may lean, particularly with your principles, one way or the other, and you should hold true to those principles. But you just can't ignore the other side because they may not espouse the same party lines that your party does. And so we definitely need more leaders and less flamethrowers.
What do you think is the fix, Chip, in your professional opinion and over the years that you've been in politics, and whether from the inside or the outside? Because like I said, I just see things getting worse every day.
Well, there's no short-term fix. That's for certain. And two, yeah, it is getting worse because we can pick and choose our news sources now and get only the information we want, usually the information that reaffirms the ideas that we had from the beginning, whether those ideas are right or wrong. And that's a sad thing. I was just talking to a colleague here in the office this morning. I was recalling an article, and I want to say it was in the Wall Street Journal. This was back probably in 2021. And I'll take an issue that should have never, ever, ever been a partisan issue. It's truly just a science issue, science and data issue. And that is what happened during COVID. Like two things: who was getting sick and who was most susceptible to permanent health damage or death, right? And over time, we could get the numbers to determine, okay, this age population was getting sick, this age population wasn't. These are the people most susceptible to death. These are the people most susceptible to serious illness. And these are the people least susceptible to that. But then they went out and they asked all the age groups of people to say, all right, so here are the facts. And then we're going to ask you the same questions of what's your perception. And the gulf between what was reality, the actual data, and what the youngest people in our country thought was what was happening was dramatic. In other words, young people were saying, 20-year-olds and 30-year-olds are dying of COVID, when the data was telling us, no, that almost never happens. In fact, far more are dying in car crashes. And you have to begin to ask yourself, well, if this is hard, fast data that is not political in any way, how are they becoming so detached from it that they can't even understand it? How are they so far removed from the reality of it? And the problem is that we politicize something that should have never been politicized. And we were telling young people, this is the way you should believe about COVID. And they're getting these ideas in their head that they couldn't walk outside without 4 masks on. When it was absurd. I mean, you still see it today. I can walk around Washington, D.C. and still see 20-year-olds walking around with multiple masks on. And I'm like, there's no scientific basis at all for that. How did you get to that point?
Yeah, I see that all the time in D.C. and I'm scratching my head. I go, have you not seen the report that says this is absolutely 100% ineffective?
Right. Well, even if it were effective, a 20-year-old doesn't have to worry about it.
Yeah,
I mean, it's
true.
not, right?
Yeah, it's crazy. Elaine?
Last question is going to be just on small business. What advice do you have for small businesses around the country as we look and move towards 2024? And there's just so much uncertainty and so much, obviously, it almost feels like the world is on fire some days.
Yeah. Well, the one thing you can't do is check out, because those who advocate policies that can destroy your small business, they are not checking out. In fact, they're louder than they ever have been before. They're more engaged. They're voting more often. They're showing up at city halls, at state legislatures here in Washington, D.C. And so if you just sit back and say, you know what, I'm frustrated with the ineffectiveness of Congress or whatever state I live in, I'm just going to give up and put my head down, that's not going to work. I mean, it may be the path of least resistance, but you will wake up one day wishing, I wish I would have gotten involved with that. Now, something that's coming up in the very near future is what's going to happen with these tax cuts that were passed during the last administration. These tax cuts have been incredibly important for the U.S. economy and most important for small businesses, especially those subchapter S small businesses. And so these could easily go away. And so if you're not out there advocating, if you're not out there getting involved, you need to. So what I've always told people is, first of all, adopt a politician. Now, for the next 12 to 18 months, I would suggest somebody that's a member of Congress who will be voting on this. But just tell them your story. Say, I'm a small business owner. I employ this many people. And if you allow these tax cuts to expire, I'm either going to lose my business or I'm going to lose this part of my business. I'm going to have to get rid of these number of people that I employ, and tell them your actual story. If you don't get involved, you don't tell your story, and you don't advocate for good policies, the other side is going to win. The other side is not a political party. The other side is a group of people who don't want to see you succeed, or, as we were talking about a moment ago, they have no clue how an actual free market economy works, and therefore their policies are detrimental to raising all those boats like happened in Georgia over the last 10 to 15 years.
Yeah, so Chip, I jokingly say that we should have a day here in this country that's like, bring your legislator to work day, right? So that they can actually understand how business actually really works and operates, rather than this fantasy that they think it operates in.
Well, Alfredo, it used to be April 15th was such a big day, and it still is for me, because I hate writing that check or sending in the estimated additional amount for my extension. But because people's money just gets automatically withdrawn out of their paycheck, they don't even see their paycheck really anymore. It's direct deposit. I think people have lost in some ways the connection to just how much of the money that they earn is being taken and then in most cases completely squandered by local, state, and federal governments. And that's unfortunate because April 15th was a day most people looked around and said, wow, I wish my taxes weren't so high. And I don't think people have that same reaction anymore because they just don't see it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'll tell you, spoken like a true JCN Foundation board member, and which we, again, very much appreciate your willingness to spend the time to do this and with your leadership. I think we'll do great things.
I'm so honored to be part of it. And thank you for what all of you do, because you're out there carrying a banner that is maybe the most important banner one can carry.
Thank you.
Yeah, Chip, thanks so much for your insights and joining us again on the show and updating us on everything. We appreciate your time, obviously serving on the board, and look forward to getting your input and on future things that we're working on and projects. And thank you all for joining us on Main Street Matters, America's Small Business Megaphone. Main Street Matters is part of the Salem Podcast Network. New episodes debut every Wednesday and Friday. Please subscribe to the show at salempodcastnetwork.com or wherever you get your podcast from. And we'll be back real soon.